of the updates ahead of that meeting tomorrow in Alaska. Matty will be joining us later in the programme, but we first shift our attention to the Middle East, and the European Union has firmly rejected any territorial change in Gaza that is not part of a political agreement. The spokesperson stressed that any such move would undermine the prospects for peace and reiterated the EU's support for a negotiated two-state solution. The comments come as Israel prepares a new offensive in Gaza City, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu suggesting that Palestinians could be allowed to leave the enclave. The EU joins a growing list of nations voicing concern over the humanitarian toll and displacement caused by the near 2-year war. Well, a few updates for us to go through there, and joining us to do so, Jonathan Hoffman, the former Vice President of the Zionist Federation of the United Kingdom, who joins us live from London. Thank you ever so much, Jonathan, for joining us. Let's first just get your initial reaction to these comments from the European Union.
Well, Joshua, you have to be a little bit careful, because this was a spokesman in answer to a question. It wasn't a European Union statement agreed by all of the members, because that would be quite difficult, because there are countries who disagree with each other. For example, Hungary is much more aligned with what Israel wants to do than, say, Germany, France, or Italy. So this was a comment from a Commission spokesperson, which, to my mind, doesn't have the same weight as a statement from the European Union signed by leaders of all countries.
Yes, absolutely. But let's shift our attention to some of the European nations then, if not directly the whole European Union bloc as a collective. Of course, comments coming from many of the pivotal nations within that group, talking about the situation in Gaza. Let's look at rhetoric as a whole, Jonathan. Of course, it has shifted in recent times, and this comes amidst Benjamin Netanyahu firmly stating that his operations will move forward. Is Israel isolating themselves on the geopolitical situation?
Well, looking at the European Union countries, you've got Spain and France, who say that at the time of the UN meeting, General Assembly in September, they will say that they recognize a Palestinian state. The United Kingdom's done the same, but of course the United Kingdom is no longer in the European Union. The European Union's official stance is that Israel needs to come to a peace agreement. There needs to be a peace agreement. There needs to be movement to a two-state solution. But not all countries in the European Union are agreed on the path or on the timing of that. You know, and as far as I think Germany has said that they will impose a boycott on weapons deliveries to Israel, but they haven't said they will recognize a Palestinian state. So things are not uniform within the European Union. As far as Israel becoming isolated in the world is concerned, the most important player, the United States, is obviously still on side.
Yes.
And other countries, for example, Argentina and Hungary, are on side. So it's, you know, it's not true to say that Israel is an international pariah. The anti-Israel forces like to make that comment, but it simply isn't true. There's plenty of support for Israel among, for example, Christians in the United States, President Trump, and other countries as well.
Yes.
So it's much more of a nuanced, complex position than you might think, Joshua.
Absolutely, Jonathan. Of course, it is extremely nuanced, as you've said, but also extremely divisive. And of course, a topic of conversation that continues to be had surrounding the situation of hostages being held, the conditions that they're being held in. I just want to bring it back to hostages. Of course, protests within Israel, some anti-government protesters talking about ending this conflict, but also, of course, an acknowledgement that the situation for hostages is getting worse potentially day by day. Those videos, those horrific videos released in recent times of hostages starved, digging their own graves, shocking the world. Do you, Jonathan, think that Benjamin Netanyahu's offensive expanding into Gaza City is putting those hostages and their well-being first?
The Israeli government has a terribly difficult balancing act to carry out. On the one hand, they want to move further to eliminating Hamas. On the other hand, they want to rescue the hostages. And clearly those two aims sometimes conflict with each other. We saw more than a year ago that there were, I think, 4 hostages who were killed by friendly fire from Israel. And that is always a risk. But one has to ask, Joshua, is it better for those hostages to starve slowly and die that way, or is it better that they should come to a death with Israel trying to eliminate Hamas? You know, these are terribly difficult moral decisions. Nobody would envy Netanyahu or the government in trying to make those decisions, but that is what people vote for. People vote for politicians to make very difficult decisions. I wouldn't like to be making that decision. I'm sure you wouldn't either. But, you know, that decision has to be made. It's an incredibly difficult decision, and nobody can envy the people who have to make it.
Absolutely. Jonathan Hoffman, thank you ever so much for that insight and context